And so I call this a paradigm shift because maybe you see in your training what I used to do. So it doesn't mean that I'm more correct than you or that I'm going to get different results than you as this. I'm just going to show you what I changed and what I believe to be really good for our program. Okay, so my first question I'd like to ask you, do you consider your training system in track to be bottom up or top down? Because for the first 20 years of my coaching career, I was a bottom up coach. And now, the last 10 years, I've been a top down coach. So, what do I mean by bottom up? Okay. We used to do speed workouts early and often, high intensity workouts early and often. There's a local school in Utah who's pretty famous for their Instagram account, and they would show pictures of their kids laying dead all over the track after an intense workout in the middle of December. And that's kind of what our program is like, high intensity workouts early and often. When we hit speed, we hit speed. And our speed was anaerobic system emphasized. And I think personally for me, this is one of the biggest, I feel is one of the biggest mistakes in my career as a coach, is that I always assumed that speed, the word speed, was totally anaerobic component. And I think it's a mistake. For example, would you consider if you put a kid in the 400 meter dash and he ran 60, that he was a good quarter miler? Or would you consider that he had good speed? A 60 in the quarter. That's pretty stinky, isn't it? Now, if he does 4 of those in a row, he's one of 10 boys in U.S. history. So what changes between a kid who runs 160 and runs 4? It's because he can hold pace. It's because he has the aerobic capacity to be able to hold pace for 4 laps instead of 1. And when I had this aha experience about 10, 11 years ago, and it came about because of our success in cross country, that changed everything I did in track and how I trained the boys. I said, hey, we've been successful in cross country with this training, let's keep it going. Another thing with bottom-up training is that I was trying to have 2 peaks during the season. One for the end of indoor track, so that's why we were so intense. We were doing hard quarters every couple weeks, 200 meters, 20 by 200 in January, and trying to peak for Simplot Games and then peak again outdoors. There's a lot of teams that I see, they have great kids early season outdoors or at the end of indoors. They go to New Balance indoors. Their kids peak there, or their kids peak at Arcadia because they're training hard so that they can qualify for Arcadia and run at Arcadia. And then with our training, we're just slamming them by the end of outdoors, to be polite about it. Another thing I think is key to bottom-up training is separated event groups. Now, I've always had a really small group, so I couldn't afford to say, oh, you guys are the middle distance group and you guys are my 2 milers, you're my distance group. But what I found out when we continued on our aerobic engine training is that I didn't need to separate my event groups. I just train all of them as distance runners. You guys are the distance squad. And guess what? During the season, you're going to get to run a 400. You're going to get to run 800s. And what I found out, as we're going to see during the slides today, is that the greater the aerobic engine they had, not only did I have a great 2-mile group, but those guys became my best milers and my best 800-meter guys. And some of them every year, at least half the guys on our 4x4 were distance guys. Okay? Another thing with bottom-up training is that an intensive racing schedule. We had a kid this summer, he was the 1A state champ last year from Monticello, which is way down in the southeast corner of Utah, across from the Colorado border. It's on the way to Albuquerque. You go through Dove Creek and Cortez and then down through Farmington. And his dad started teaching or coaching their team, and so he got high school running coach. He asked me at BYU Invite, what can I do? And I turned him on to high school running coach. I said, all our workouts there, you've got track workouts from the top coaches in the state. So he started doing those workouts. And this last summer, his son, who was state champ as a junior, he came up and he had his grandparents live in American Fork. So he came up and trained with us all summer long. And then he would tell his dad what they were doing. And they had 2 really good freshmen this summer. They worked hard all summer. They'd never done a summer before. But they were following our workouts. And in 1A state, they went 1, 2, 3, 4 with 2 freshmen. And 1A state are schools under 80, something like that. They went 1, 2, 3, 4 in the 1A race. So that's the thing I see in bottom-up training. And 6, something we think about when we're tapering for region, tapering for state. And during when you're racing maybe 2-3 days a week because you have a dual or tri meet, and then on the weekends you've got a big invite, maybe a 2-day invite, is that we de-emphasize of aerobic training as the season progresses. And Coach Gary, the one thing I saw yesterday that hit my eye was D-training. And that's something that, we're separating the 4 things in Lydiard training and we compartmentalize each of our training blocks. If this is what I've got to concentrate on, instead of realizing that you've got to work on all 4 components of distance running all year long. And so those are what I consider what I was doing for the first 20 years of my coaching career. And I call it bottom-up training. Now, in contrast to that, what's top-down training? First off, as I said, I can't afford to distinguish between training groups. There's no distinguishing. Everybody works together, every workout. Okay? The second thing is I'm going to continue what we did in cross country because the boys are comfortable with it, they know it, and they're seeing success. So I'm going to focus on developing our aerobic engine. And we also work on our strength component. Right now, we still do the grinder every Monday. We still do a power. All we're doing right now for speed, besides after our intermediate runs, we always do stride laps. Every day after an intermediate run, we do 1 power run a week. We do our long run on Saturday. Now this weekend, there's an optional meet. It's club sport. Indoors is a club sport in Utah. So the boys don't have to go to a meet if they don't want to. My team captains are taking care of practice yesterday and, Thursday afternoon, yesterday and today. So they were in charge of the long run this morning. The other thing that I try to focus on is I try to work really hard to teach pace. I like to paraphrase Chevy Chase in Caddyshack. Feel the pace, be the pace. I want them to get ingrained. I was blessed with great coaches. Coach Gary was talking about Leela Beatty as my junior college coach. We would go to the University of Illinois indoor track at the Armory, and Coach would say, today we're doing 400s. You're going to do 8 400s at 72, and I could hit every single one at 72. If he changed and said, okay, now we're going to do some at 68, I could hit exactly 68. I had internalized pace in my brain, in my body, and that's what I do with my athletes. We focus when we start doing repeats, we concentrate on pace so that they don't be the crazy freshman that goes out in 65 in an 800 when their PR is 220, or they go out in 70 in a mile when they've never broken 5 minutes. So we work a lot on that because your kids are going to race how they train. So you've got to prepare them in their training so that they are confident they're racing. The next thing is that we consider, even though we have races indoors and we go to Simplot Games, that's our last indoors meet, we consider January through March in our training exactly like June through August. And I was talking to Bill Aris, we've become good friends at Nationals, and I was talking about this to him, and he goes, absolutely. And he couldn't come, he wanted to come and teach here, but they have an official season, I'm sure some of you also do, where they have an official state championship. It is a sanctioned and regulated sport in the state of New York. And so he had to work this weekend with his athletes. They had to meet, and he couldn't make it. But he still trains his kids through this 3-month block. So instead of trying to peak for twice in 6 months, we only have 2 peaks all year long. State meet and cross country, state meet and track. Everything else after those things is icing on the cake. And one thing I'm going to talk about specifically today, and I'm going to use Casey Klinger as an example since he was our 402 miler and 2-time NXN champion and has done some incredible things in his career. He was his first semester at BYU, he placed 24th at NCAA's and was the top freshman there. First 10K he ever ran was at Nationals.